Some stories stay with you. In bad times, they rescue. In good times, they inspire. My name is Amir, and this is my story. It starts in 1941 in Yugoslavia. When the Germans invaded there was a young lady alone with 2 young children, her husband long gone in the war. They were Jews. It was a dangerous time where Jewish women and children were being executed and men were carried off to concentration and labor camps. She decided it was safer for her and her children to flee to fascist Italy than to stay in that killing zone. The train was full of desperate refugees just like her and her kids. At the time, there was a tremendous chaos in the railways because of the German invasion, and when the train arrived at the town of Mostar, it had to stop because the bridge had been blown up by retreating soldiers. And she was just left standing there on that bridge with her 2 small children. She didn't know what to do. There were many Nazi collaborators, and she knew all around her were people who might kill her. And then suddenly a man approached her. He was pointing a rifle, and he demanded, "You're a Jew, right?" But we'll get back to that story.
June 1976.
It was the first family trip out of this country.
We were 2 couples go to Europe on vacation.
After our holiday in Israel, we went back to France because we lived this time in France.
I was on my way to the Olympic Games.
I was going to England because my mother died suddenly. I was surprised to hear that we were landing in Athens.
I wasn't meant to be Air France airplane. I had tickets for El Al.
It was difficult for me because 3 children, 2, 3, and 6, a lot of things to do.
Earlier that morning, a Singapore airline jet from Bahrain landed at the Athens airport, and 4 sinister passengers, 2 Germans and 2 Arabs, disembarked, picked up their bags, and headed across the airport to wait for Air France Flight 139 inbound from Israel. There was no security in Athens that day, and the 4 made it unchallenged onto the Air France flight.
This was Air France, so no security at all those days.
Trying to have a nap, I was tired.
These 2 young Arabs started running amok and shouting terribly. Then the German woman who was a real Nazi came, and you could see her voice full of hate.
And she had a gun and a hand grenade.
With the pin drawn out and just holding it.
I remember somebody getting up to try and stop her, and one of the men hit him.
In the speaker, he said that the plane is hijacked.
Freezing fear.
I have never been so frightened in my life.
I remember myself being 6 years old, sitting down.
She asked me, "They are going to kill us?" And I didn't know what to say.
I've got a funeral to get to. I'm not having it. And I cut it down to 3 things. I could either have a heart attack, I could have an asthma attack, or I could have a miscarriage. And in the meantime, got permission to land in Libya.
First stop on this flight of terror was Benghazi, Libya.
I started complaining of pain, and I kept groaning and groaning. And the door opened, and this little doctor climbed up, and he said to the new captain, "I want to take her to my clinic." He said, "Okay, take her."
Patricia's quick-thinking, gutsy play paid off. The Libyans bought her story of a miscarriage and took her to a 5-star hotel Sunday night. She awoke to find that her nightmare was real, but then she was placed in a holding cell. That night, she was taken to a British airjet, the only one that week, that arrived in London on Tuesday morning. There she met with British Special Branch and was able to provide the first clear picture to what really happened on that plane. Meanwhile, after 9 hours on the tarmac, the plane finally took off.
We have to deposit the flight plane. Destination, south.
We flew all night, and when we landed in Entebbe, we thought that's it.
Here's where the nightmare is finished, because we're at Entebbe, we're in Uganda, at our friends, Idi Amin.
The hostages sat on the plane for hours, and through the window, they could see even more terrorists there, embracing their comrades.
And then we're taken off the plane between 2 lines of Ugandan soldiers armed to the teeth. And we learned the sad truth that we're going to stay there.
Then we realized that the story only begins.
When Idi Amin came by, it was a frightening scene.
She was 2 years old.
All the room was very quiet. I asked, who's that crazy man?
And I said, oh my God, maybe he understand what she said.
It was like he couldn't speak French and he didn't understand it.
He said, you may not all know me, but I am Field Marshal Dr. Idi Amin Dada. And then I realized that we need to start to worry.
Tonight, the Palestinian hijackers still hold 256 passengers at gunpoint in the airport terminal at Kampala, Uganda. Their price for releasing them is the release of 57 of what they call freedom fighters, now in prison in 5 countries. Most are held in Israel, others are in West Germany, Kenya, Switzerland, and France.
On Tuesday afternoon, for the Israelis and Jews among the hostages, things were about to get a lot worse.
All they told us was that it was too crowded in the room, and they were going to make us more comfortable, and they were going to move some of us over to the other room. They began calling families.
The fact that a German woman was standing there and calling our names.
Jews to this door and non-Jews to that door, and the non-Jews are released and the Jews are kept. This is selection, this is Auschwitz.
They called several couples who were American but were obviously Jewish. Either they had a kippah or their names were...
A name like Greenberg would stay there, even if with American passport.
Being separated does not promise too much to us.
They might execute us.
There was hysteria, people were crying.
They forced us to go under the very low plank that we were supposed to almost crawl under it.
It was so humiliating.
Some people, there were Holocaust survivors there. There was a European lady, old one, who lost her mind completely. And
she was screaming, Yaki, Yaki.
She's living again the Holocaust.
Pressure from the hostages' families and relatives was intense.
My mother was running around banging her head against a wall. They had to sedate her the whole week because she knew that Israelis wouldn't negotiate. And in theory, she was all for that, but this is different.
Tuesday night and Wednesday, senior military were looking hard for an option. The prevailing plan at the time was dropping some amphibious troops, Israeli SEALs and unit guys in Zodiac boats into Lake Victoria, have them come ashore, make the stealth approach, free the hostages, and return to some kind of boat, maybe a yacht that would be waiting. Wednesday night and Thursday morning, the parachute and Zodiac test took place in the Mediterranean. The men were capable, but the boats were a problem. Bad news considering the added unpleasant reality of crocodiles in Lake Victoria. That plan was taken off the table, and now with the deadline hours away and no working operational plan, the cabinet had few options but to surrender.
The hijackers put off their deadline to 8 a.m. Sunday after Israel broke its long-standing policy and agreed to negotiate.
They were learning that Idi Amin was fully cooperating with the terrorists. So it wasn't just a war with terrorists, it was a war against the entire Ugandan army. The unit commander, Yoni Netanyahu, and his intelligence officer, Avi, had returned from a secret operation in the Sinai earlier Thursday, and by mid-afternoon he was tasked with planning his unit's destiny at Entebbe. He worked on the plan most of the night. By dawn, Friday morning, Yoni's plan of action was ready. Friday night, there was a rehearsal of the whole operation.
My job was to demonstrate a dark landing to the leadership of the military. It was very difficult because we tried it in Sharm el-Sheikh. So I screwed up a little bit, but still good enough to convince them that it can be done.
After the Air Force had their test, the ground soldiers had to prove that they could perform. The plan was simple: surprise and speed. A black Mercedes in the lead, like Idi Amin's, followed by 2 Land Rovers.
Drove something like 200-300 meters. We occupied the building, and that's it. And then they told us we want to do it again. And then they surprised us by planting few soldiers who shot on us. Preparations to such an operation may last, if you have enough time, 2-3 months. We had 1 day.
Beyond the horizon of any operational scenario. I mean, it was an impossible mission.
The rehearsal was chaotic, which means the mission would be a success. At least that's an old belief of the soldiers. We flew down to Sharm for the final briefing.
As we had our landing at Sharm el-Sheikh, Yoni Netanyahu gave us a brief. We'd been quite tired and confused, a lot of information, a lot of issues are happening, and then he had an opportunity to tell us, look, we are getting there. Nothing will be in accordance with the planning, but you have to get first to the hostages, kill the terrorists, make sure that the hostages are safe, and that's it. And then he took all the noise and distinguished between the signal and the noise and made the picture very clear for us.
We were wearing Ugandan soldier uniforms in the attack team.
Now it was up to a divided cabinet to give the final approval. We got the green light to take off, knowing that we could have 3 hours flying time before we got a final go-ahead.
Our plan was to follow a British plane landing 30 seconds before at its regularly scheduled time.
But about, I think, 1 hour after taking off, Yoni Netanyahu came and told us the government approved the operation.
The harsh flight to Sharm left one soldier too sick to continue. Amos Gorn was the last-minute replacement to Yoni's team.
Yoni took out a air sickness bag, and on it he drew a schematic of the building and the position of the cars as we were approaching the building and where each one of the openings were and where I was supposed to be heading.
10 minutes before landing, we came into a thunderstorm. Though we were flying in a cave and we saw nothing, and we went lower and lower. We came up to the safety altitude, which if you go down below that altitude, you may crash into the hills around the airport. And we prayed. Seconds after that, were shot out of the clouds.
It was all dark, so they turned on red lights. Yoni, the unit commander, he went all along, and he was talking to each of the troops, shook their hands. You know, it was like he knew he's going to die in 5 minutes or so.
And the Romans said that courage is not the most important virtue, but it's the one that guarantees all the others.
And we were all sitting on the vehicles ready for the mission, and the airplane was lowering down until touchdown.
Tremendous pressure at that time.
We touched down. We're all exhausted from the flight. I'm still hazy from the air sickness medicine, but we're all pumped. The adrenaline's flowing through our veins. Just after 11 p.m., we rolled off the ramp of the C-130 and made a right onto the diagonal runway. We're moving at a steady 40 miles per hour on board 3 vehicles, thousands of miles from home. It was a Twilight Zone moment. Here we are, alone in the African midnight. It seemed so normal. As we rolled down the runway, I could see the lights of the control tower ahead of us in the distance. And I realized, in 5 minutes, some of us will be dead. We grow closer and closer. Now we're on the final approach to the old terminal. Suddenly, we see a Ugandan soldier on our left and a Ugandan soldier on the right. On the runway, just as Yoni had positioned them in the rehearsal the night before. The sentries stamped their feet and pointed their weapons at the approaching convoy. What to do? We can't leave them behind us. Yoni knew there was no choice. The Mercedes veered to the right and Yoni opened fire with a silenced pistol. The sentry went down, but not out. He opened fire with his rifle, and the guys from the rover ahead of us opened fire with their AKs to finish the job. Suddenly the night's silence had been ripped apart. The Mercedes raced ahead and stopped short of our target. We followed quickly and tried to keep up while listening hard for any noises of the hostages being slaughtered. Nothing yet. The Mercedes had stopped on the near side of the control tower. A smart move in case anyone popped out to investigate the shooting. We slipped alongside and leaped off the rovers to head around the control tower towards the old terminal. The plan was to move with all focus, stop for nothing. Yoni had told us, anyone hit, and they would have to wait for us to get back to them. Any delay could be disastrous for the hostages. They were the mission. The men moved swiftly, but not in a full run. Amazingly, the element of surprise was still with us. I was one of the last getting out of the second rover, so I knew instinctively I had to hustle to catch Amnon, my squad leader. Now there was no time for fear, just move. The point man is shooting at something and veers to the left. Does he see a terrorist? And everybody following behind is forced to stop. He was firing forward. No one could pass. The attack was collapsing. I strained to hear a rifle response, but there wasn't any. I hear Yoni yelling to him, "Advance! Advance!" I believe that I lost my squad leader, so I run to the outside, around the stopped men, heading for my door on the left. I see Yoni running forward, the men following. I pass him on my left. Behind me, I hear shots. A Ugandan soldier has popped up from the boxes stacked on my right. Shlomi and the others cut him down. I focus on my door and finding my squad leader. I cannot be late. I had to cover him. I hear someone shout that Yoni had been hit. I run full out. Suddenly, from inside the terminal, someone was shooting at me. At me! I fired back. I could see that I hit him. I couldn't stop. I was through the door. I was inside the room. I fired at the body on the floor and then swung to cover the right, following my mission plan. Time slowed to a stop as I realized I was the first to enter. On the left, out of my view, there were 2 terrorists, maybe 3 meters away, kneeling on the floor. They'd been looking the other way, out the window. When they realized that someone had jumped into the room, they raised their rifles to fire at me. My squad leader, Amnon, had seen me run past, and he ran to catch me. He hit the room a half second behind me and went left. He saw the two terrorists aiming at me, and he shot them. A split second later, I would have been dead. No doubt.
The first two people who were in the room were Amir and Amnon. And then I went into the room off inside on the left. I see somebody getting up. I shot at him, hit him in the chest.
Somebody said, well, Israeli soldiers.
Everybody lay down.
Thrilled to see rescuers, Jean-Jacques Momani jumped forward, only to be tragically cut down. Ida Borikovich and Patko Cohen also lost their lives in that hail of fire.
Meanwhile, in the customs hall, Yiftach burst into the building. At the base of the stairs, he shot two soldiers and headed up. At the top, he was confronted with two more. At close range, shot them. He and his team moved quickly to secure the top floor, catching the Ugandan soldiers there by complete surprise. Gura's team hit the third door and raced to the back of the hall. They find and kill two terrorists in the back kitchen and continue their sweep. Giora and Shlomi advanced cautiously. Ahead of them were two men holding their hands up, claiming to be hostages. They were getting closer. Shlomi thought they might be harmless. Giora got too close and saw a grenade in one of their hands. "Shoot them," he said in Hebrew. Giora dove to his left, and Shlomi cut them down, but the grenade rolled out of the terrorists' hands. Everyone dove for cover. It went off, and they were safe. Barely. In Tel Aviv, the country's leaders are nervously listening to real-time sounds from the raid relayed by a Boeing 707 orbiting high above the Entebbe airfield. On board, radio techs are working feverishly to keep the link open and find out if we can refuel in Nairobi. Over the new terminal, the paratroopers had secured the building. A small group of them headed up the outer flight of stairs to cover the roof. Søren Hershko trailed them a moment too late. Hershko is paralyzed still today. Our room was secure, but outside firing continued. The second and third C-130 landed 7 minutes later, and each delivered two heavily armored personnel carriers. The first couple raced to engage the resistance from the control tower. To cover our flight, they shot up the MiGs sitting on the side of the airport so we wouldn't have to face them in the air. As we saw the hostages hurrying to the plane, some of us had a profound flashback
of a picture which I saw of Jews who were taken to the gas chambers, so helpless, so frightened. But I made immediately the difference because at that time, around them, there was Israeli soldiers to defend them, to rescue them. At that moment, I understood what the state of Israel and the idea of really what kind of a change it's made in the faith, in the history of the Jewish people.
Sadly, there would still be one more casualty. Dora Bloch, left behind in a Kampala hospital, was brutally murdered by a Means henchman the following day.
The armored carrier stayed to secure the scene until the freed but vulnerable hostage plane and the other two were safely off. Then they rolled up to their C-130 and took off to refuel in Nairobi, Kenya.
From the ashes of the Holocaust to Entebbe, you see the resurrection of the Jews and the resurrection of the Jewish capacity to defend themselves.
On board the rescued C-130, the emotions were raw. The newly freed quietly rejoicing at the same time, pained by the loss of our commander Yoni. A sacrifice almost too much for any of us to bear. So there we were, flying home. Suddenly, over the cockpit radio, a French news station is reporting on a commando raid in Entebbe. The word is out, but we're still hours from home and between two hostile countries. A tense moment. But then, like angels, a squad of our F-4 Phantoms dropped down on our wings, and we knew we would be okay. Coming home. We were amazed to see the entire country on their feet with joy. It was as if we freed each and every one of them. At a secret location, we offloaded our stuff, exhausted. But seeing the hostages coming off the plane, now free and reunited with their families, made my heart blush. We headed back to base. The country was deliriously happy, but we had an early day Monday and I needed a rest. In Hebrew, we have an expression, saving the life of one person is like saving an entire universe. And as for that woman and her kids left on that bridge in 1941, a man approached her. He was pointing a rifle and he demanded, "You're a Jew, right?" She felt her death coming towards her. She didn't know what to do. And she said, "Yes, I'm a Jew." He said, "My name is Cohen. Come with me." He was a disguised Jew. He took them into hiding. This lady was my grandmother. The two small kids, my father and his sister. My father told me after the Entebbe raid that all his life, when he wakes in the morning, he says thank you to that anonymous Cohen on the bridge in Mostar. I like to think that in some way on that day in 1976, for those people in Entebbe, we were Cohen on the bridge.